Cars are one of those things that almost everybody needs, and it can be kind of an emotional purchase for a lot of people. You know, we want something that makes us feel good about ourselves, something that'll make us lift up our heads, poke out our chest, and be like, I'm that guy.
I'm that guy.
I'm that guy.
I'm that guy.
And so they end up buying a car in the most expensive way possible, the car lease. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about all the mistakes people make when leasing a car and what you can do to avoid those mistakes. Let's get into it. Around 20% of people in the market for a new car end up getting a car lease. So a good amount of people fall into this trap. As did I. I had just finished college in 2010, so we weren't that far removed from the recession. Unemployment was still almost 10%. The only job I could find was 60 miles away from my home, and I was commuting from Conyers, Georgia to Kennesaw, Georgia in Atlanta traffic. So my commute was almost 2 hours each way. And I was driving an old Expedition that my brother-in-law gave me, but it had no heat and AC. So you know I was dying. So when I finally got a new job in another state with no savings to buy a car, my dad suggested I get a lease. And yeah, I kind of knew it was not a good move financially, but I wanted a nicer car after driving in misery. Plus, it was the easy way out. I wouldn't have to ride the bus while I save for a car, and I can make the payments. So I get why people do it, but that doesn't make it smart. I leased a brand new Honda Civic with only $700 down. Didn't know my interest rate, what kind of lease I had, how much I could buy the car for at the end of the term. But later on down the road, when I did look at my lease to see how much I could buy it for, it was nowhere near what I thought based on the payments I had been making. And I know I'm not the only one that's made this mistake. So let's look at some car leasing mistakes that people make and how you can avoid them. But let's first look at how a car lease works. Unlike buying or renting a car, a lease is kind of a mix between the two. You're basically renting a car for 2 to 3 years, but you're also essentially borrowing the money to cover how much the car goes down in value. The leasing company treats it like a loan. So let's say you lease a car for $50,000 for 3 years. According to KBB, most cars depreciate about 20% in the first year, 15% every year after that. So after year 1, it would be worth $40,000. After year 2, it would be worth $34,000. And after year 3, about $29,000. So in just 3 years, you lost over $21,000 in value. And that's what your lease is based off of. They treat it as though they're loaning you that $21,000 to cover the loss in value, and you're making monthly payments over 2 or 3 years to pay them back, with interest, of course. They calculate your monthly lease payment by taking the monthly depreciation plus a finance charge plus tax. And that brings me to the first problem I have with leases. You're basically paying for the most expensive period of a car's life, the first 3 years. And you aren't building any equity into your vehicle, so at the end of your lease, you don't have a car. And if you're someone that likes jumping from lease to lease every 3 years so you can constantly get the newest car, you can do that, but you're gonna pay a big price for it. Once your lease is up, you have the option to either return it, buy it, or jump into another lease. And in this whole leasing process, there's many mistakes that a lot of people make. But before we continue, I just want to ask that you subscribe, hit the like button, and share this video with anyone you know who's thinking about getting into a lease. It not only can help them make a good buying decision, but it can help us grow this channel as well, so we'd really appreciate it. One of the reasons people fall for car leases is because it's more confusing than buying a car, and they use terminologies that most people don't understand. Gross capitalization costs, net capitalization costs, residual value, money factor, close-ended lease, open-ended lease, acquisition fees, overage fees, so you can see why it's confusing. Now, there are 5 big things people usually do wrong on the purchase. First, because people see it as a rental, they don't normally negotiate the actual price of the car, and they're much more likely to accept the MSRP. The only thing that's important to a lot of people is simply the payment. But only looking at the payment is a big mistake because remember, your lease payment is based off the depreciation of the vehicle or the difference between the current price and the residual value or the expected value at the time the car is turned back in. So the higher the price, the bigger the depreciation and the bigger the payment. So make sure you search for not only the MSRP, but also something called the adjusted cap cost or the net cap cost. The net capitalization cost is the actual final sales price that's used to calculate the depreciation, and therefore is what the lease payment is based off of. The second mistake people make is not knowing the money factor. The money factor is the rental fee and is basically the equivalent of the interest rate for a lease. Remember, they're treating your depreciation like a loan, and you are charged the money factor in the same way a car loan would have an interest rate. Now, one of the reasons people don't know the money factor is because they aren't required to disclose it to you. When you buy a car, dealers are required to tell you the interest rate. But when you lease a car, it's technically not a loan, so they don't have to tell you the money factor. And most of the time, they won't unless you really push for it. And since it's hidden, well, you know it's usually higher than if you were to purchase a car. Now, knowing the money factor is important so you can know if you're getting a good rate. You can compare it to your APR if you were to finance the car, so it helps you figure out what the better deal is. And even if they do tell you the money factor, it's not normally listed as a percentage like a normal interest rate. It's shown as a decimal point like 0.0025. And most people don't know what to do with that. If you see a money factor, you have to multiply by 2,400 to get the interest rate. So a 0.0025 money factor would be a 6% interest rate. The third mistake people make is they don't pay attention to the buyout price. The buyout price is the amount you can purchase the car for at the end of the lease. And the buyout price is estimated based on the residual value or what they believe the car will be worth when you turn the car back in, plus taxes and fees. Now, this is forward-looking and there's no way to know if the number is accurate or not, especially in times when the used car market is unstable. And depreciation estimates are very different between KBB, Edmunds, and CarEdge. So you could end up getting lucky and have a buyout price that's lower than what the value is, or it could be higher. You kind of have to make the best educated guess based on what you know when you buy. But this brings me to the fourth mistake people make. They don't look at whether or not they will be responsible to pay the difference if the actual value of the car is less than what the leasing company projected. This is something called an open-ended lease. And in this type of lease, you're responsible for the difference between the car's residual value and the actual value. If you don't pay attention to this, you could have to fork up thousands of additional dollars when you return the car. Now, luckily, most of the leases I see are close-ended, which means you won't be responsible for the difference. It's kind of a risk that the leasing company has to take. Now, the fifth mistake people make is just not paying attention to the numerous additional fees that are everywhere in your leasing agreement. On top of the normal fees you have when buying a car, like acquisition, doc fees, and title and registration fees, you also have additional fees that only apply to lease deals, like excessive use fees if you go over your mileage, disposition fees, which is for getting the car cleaned up and ready to resell, and wear and tear fees that cover things like dents, cracks in your windshield, worn tires, tears and stains in your seats. These fees can really add up, so if you lease a car, which I don't recommend, make sure you figure them out and negotiate them down. Next is driving the car. There are a few restrictions when using your leased vehicle. First is the allowable mileage. Leases usually only allow you to drive the car either 10, 12, or 15,000 miles per year. And anything over that, you'll have to pay an overage fee, usually between 10 and 30 cents per mile. And it's usually on the higher end for luxury vehicles. So it's good to monitor the miles throughout the year and not take any unnecessary road trips or anything like that. It's not fun having to pay those fees on the back end. The second restriction is that you most likely can't modify your vehicle. Again, you're really just renting the car, so it doesn't make sense anyways. You wouldn't want to put extra money into something that you don't own. Returning your car after the end of the term is usually pretty easy, and if you've taken good care of the car and didn't go over your allowable mileage, you shouldn't have any problems. Now, if you want to buy the car, your buyout price and the fees should be listed in your contract. Now, because the car market has been so unstable, the buyout price actually might be lower than the market value. So you could technically take advantage of your buyout option, then sell the car for more money. Because of this, some of these leases don't even offer buyout options anymore. And some dealers are still needing inventory, so they may try to get out of their agreement anyways. There were several news stories back in 2022 that dealers weren't honoring their agreement, and they were tacking on hefty additional fees like pre-delivery charges, extra doc fees, and electronic registration fees, so people will be dissuaded from exercising their buyout options, even though this is not legal since you have a contract. Now, luckily, inventory levels are recovering, so hopefully this won't be an issue moving forward. But it's still something that you want to watch out for. Now, if you want to get out of your lease early, that's much harder. You're basically stuck with the car for the duration of the term. Most lease agreements have very high early termination fees that can be more expensive than if you were to just keep the car through the end of the lease. Now, they'll let you get rid of your lease if you sign a new lease, of course, with a fee, but otherwise you might be out of luck. It's possible, but it's very difficult. Now the problem with getting out of your lease early is that many people want to get out of their lease when they need the extra cash. Maybe they lost their job or they have additional expenses that they didn't expect, so they can't afford the payment anymore. And this, of course, wouldn't be the time where they would have the money to buy out their leases, in addition to the numerous fees they tack on. These are just a few of the main mistakes people make and some of the issues that they come across when leasing a vehicle. So let's look at an example here for a Chevy Silverado. If you look at the lease option, you have $2,000 down, and if you look at the total payments in the fine print, it's $40,704. So the total out-of-pocket cost for this lease over 4 years is $42,704. Now, if you compare that to the finance option, cash down is still $2,000. And if you also look at the fine print here, you can see the total payments of $65,712. So your total cost for this finance option is $67,712. And as you can see, this is more for the finance option, but at the end of the term, you own your car right out. And if going by KBB's assumed depreciation, this truck should still be worth over $31,000 in 4 years. So you're really only out less than $37,000. So leasing is actually over $6,000 more than financing the car. And that doesn't account for many of the additional fees I discussed earlier. Now the problem, of course, is that the finance option has a considerably higher monthly payment. And if you can't afford this payment, you can either give a higher down payment, which is usually at least 10% anyways, or you can get a slightly lesser vehicle. But in any case, in this example, in the vast majority of cases, leasing is more expensive than financing. Now, having said that, buying a new car isn't a good idea either. You can check out this video if you want a better option. And again, if you like this content, please subscribe, like, and share. You can also hit the bell and turn on notifications so you know when I come out with more content. Thank you.
I'm that guy.
Now you gotta do an attitude, be like, I'm that guy.
I'm that guy. I'm that guy.